The rain came down hard on Bakersfield that December morning, the kind of cold, relentless rain that turned the streets into rivers of oil and regret. The courthouse steps were slick with it, reflecting the red and blue lights of a dozen police cars like broken neon in a puddle. 200 people stood in the downpour, silent, waiting. At the top of those steps stood an 8-year-old boy with red hair plastered to his forehead and freckles standing out like constellations against pale skin. His
Listen,
name
kid,
was Caleb
this is
James
important.
Brennan.
You have to
His hands were
understand.
shaking as they held the microphone, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "My name is Caleb Brennan," he said into the microphone, his breath fogging in the cold December air. "I'm 8 years old, Andina. 5 days ago, I whispered 4 words to a stranger. 4 words that changed everything." The crowd didn't move, didn't breathe. Behind him, his mother stood with one hand on his shoulder, her face carved from stone and sorrow. To his left, a line of motorcycles stretched down the street, their chrome catching what little light broke through the storm clouds. Men and women in leather vests stood beside them, arms crossed, watching. And in the back of a police van, hands cuffed behind his back, a man with cold gray eyes and a scar across his temple stared at the boy through the rain-streaked window. His name was Dominic Voss, and for the first time in 20 years, Dominic Voss looked afraid. Caleb's voice rose above the rain. "They say kids should be seen, not heard. That we're too young to understand, too small to matter." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I learned it something 5 days ago. I learned that sometimes the smallest voice can be the loudest. Sometimes a whisper can save a life. And sometimes doing the right thing means standing up when everyone else sits down." The camera pulled back, rising above the courthouse, above the crowd, above the rain. The voice that came next wasn't Caleb's anymore. It was deeper, older, worn smooth by 20 years of living. "In Bakersfield, nobody listens to kids, especially not red-haired kids who live in the back room of a roadside diner. But that day, I learned that the world doesn't care about your age when you have the courage to speak. My name is Caleb Brennan, and this is the story of how a whisper became a roar." The screen went black. White letters appeared. 5 days earlier, December 18th, 2024. The alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, the same as it did every morning. Caleb's hand shot out from under the thin blanket and slapped it silent before the second beep. The room was dark, cold, the kind of cold that seeps through single-pane windows and settles in your bones. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the diner waking up beyond the thin wall, the hiss of the coffee maker, the clatter of pans. His mother's footsteps, quick and efficient, moving through the kitchen she knew by heart. Caleb sat up, his breath visible in the cold air. The room was small, barely big enough for a twin bed, a dresser with 3 working drawers, and a desk he'd built himself from scrap wood he'd found behind the hardware store. The walls were bare except for one thing, a framed photograph on the nightstand. Army Sergeant Brian Brennan, dress uniform, American flag in the background. The photo was 5 years old, taken 2 months before his last deployment, before Afghanistan, before the word that changed everything, killed in action. Caleb was 3 when his father died, old enough to remember the uniform, the smell of aftershave, the way his dad's hands felt when they tossed him in the air. Not old enough to understand why he never came home. He touched the frame, just for a second. Then he stood, pulled on jeans and a hoodie, 2 sizes too big, and opened the door. The diner hit him like a wall of warmth, the smell of coffee and bacon grease, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the booth seats cracked and patched with duct tape. "Brennan's Roadside Diner," the sign outside said, though most people just called it Nora's place after his mother. Nora Brennan stood behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a bun, her face tired in the way that never quite went away. She was 32, but she looked older in the harsh morning light. There was a small gold pendant around her neck, a star with a blue center. A gold star, the kind they give to mothers and wives who lose someone in service. She looked up when Caleb came in, and her face softened. "Morning, love," she said. Her voice still carried traces of her childhood in Boston, the Irish neighborhoods where her grandparents had settled 3 generations back. "Sleep okay?" Caleb nodded. He didn't mention the dream he'd had, the one where his father came home and the three of them ran the diner together, laughing and whole. He never mentioned those dreams. Good boy. Grab the bus tub, will you? We've got the early crowd coming in. Caleb nodded again and moved to the back, where the gray plastic tub waited. This was his morning routine, the same every day before school. Clear tables, wipe down surfaces, refill napkin holders. Stay out of the way when customers came. Be invisible. Caleb Brennan was very good at being invisible. At 6 o'clock exactly, the door opened. The bell above it chimed, a bright sound that cut through the quiet. Caleb looked up from the table he was wiping and watched as Colonel Hank Mercer walked in. Hank Mercer was 68 years old and stood like a man who'd never learned to slouch. Ramrod straight back, shoulders squared, eyes that missed nothing. He wore a worn leather jacket over a flannel shirt, jeans with a crease sharp enough to cut, and boots that had seen better days but were polished to a shine. His hair was steel gray, cut military short. A small pin on his jacket lapel showed the dates: 1990, 1891. Operation Desert Storm. He'd been Nora's commanding officer when she served as a Navy hospital corpsman. Now he was the first customer every morning, 6 a.m. sharp, without fail. Morning, petty officer, he said as he slid into his usual booth by the window. He always called her that. Never Nora, never ma'am. Always her old rank, a reminder of who she'd been before this diner, before the widow's pendant, before the exhaustion. Morning, Colonel, Nora said, already pouring his coffee. Black, no sugar. The usual? If it's not too much trouble. It never is. Hank's eyes found Caleb across the room. The boy was wiping down the same table for the third time, pretending not to listen, but his ears were sharp. They were always sharp. Caleb, Hank said, come here a minute. Caleb set down the rag and walked over, hands in his pockets. He stood next to the booth, not quite meeting Hank's eyes. The colonel had that effect on people. Command presence, they called it. Even in retirement, Hank Mercer could fill a room just by standing in it. Yes, sir? You doing okay in school? Yes, sir. Math still giving you trouble? A little. Hank nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small book, dog-eared and worn, Basic Military Mathematics. Take this, read chapter 3, problems at the end. Bring it back when you're done and we'll go over them. Caleb took the book, his fingers tracing the cover. Witabon, because a man who can't do math can't read a map, and a man who can't read a map is lost before he starts. Hank leaned back. Your dad knew that. So should you. Caleb's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak, and slipped the book into his hoodie pocket. Nora brought Hank's breakfast. Eggs over easy, bacon, wheat toast. She set it down gently, her hand lingering on the edge of the table for just a moment. There was something unspoken between them. A history that Caleb didn't fully understand, but could feel in the way they looked at each other. Respect, trust, maybe something more. Thank you, Nora, Hank said quietly. She nodded and turned back to the kitchen. Caleb went back to his tables. The diner was starting to fill up now. A trucker named Jack Holbrook, broad-shouldered and kind-eyed, slid into a booth and ordered coffee and pie for breakfast. Eleanor Walsh, who ran the second-hand shop 3 blocks down, took her usual spot at the counter and asked for oatmeal. These were the regulars, the ones who kept the diner alive with their $5 breakfasts and $2 tips. And then, at 8 o'clock, the door opened again. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. 3 men walked in. The first was tall, maybe 6'2", with a build that suggested he worked out but not for show. His hair was dark, graying at the temples, and his face was hard. There was a scar across his right temple, pale and raised, like something had cut deep a long time ago. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they moved across the room with the precision of a man who cataloged every exit, every threat, every weakness. His name was Dominic Voss. He was 39 years old. And until 3 years ago, he'd been a detective with the Bakersfield Police Department. The 2 men behind him were younger, harder, the kind of men who did what they were told and didn't ask questions. One was thick-necked and bald. The other had tattoos crawling up his arms and a look in his eyes that said he enjoyed his work a little too much. Dominic walked to the counter like he owned the place. In a way he did. "Morning, Nora," he said. His voice was smooth, educated, the kind of voice that could sell you a car or lie to your face without flinching. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Nora's jaw tightened, but she kept her face neutral. "Mr. Voss? Business good?" "Steady. Good, good." Dominic smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know I like to hear that. Means the neighborhood's thriving. Means people feel safe." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. He set it on the counter, tapped it twice with his index finger. "Your contribution," Nora said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Investment," Dominic corrected. "You invest in the community invests in you. That's how it works, right?" Nora's hand was shaking as she picked up the envelope. She opened it just enough to see the bills inside. So sign. $200. The same as every week for the past 2 years. $200 she couldn't afford. $200 that should have gone to fixing the leaky roof, replacing the broken stove burner, buying Caleb new shoes instead of the second-hand ones he wore until the soles wore through. But she paid, because not paying meant broken windows. It meant supplies that went missing. It meant customers who stopped coming because they were too scared. "Thank you, Nor," Dominic said. He picked up the envelope, counted the bills slowly, deliberately, and slipped them back into his jacket. "Always a pleasure doing business with you." He turned to leave, and that's when he saw Caleb. The boy was standing in the corner booth, a rag in his hand, frozen. His green eyes were locked on Dominic, watching unblinking. Not with fear, with something else. Calculation. Observation. Dominic's smile widened. "Who's this?" "My son," Nora said quickly. "Caleb, go to the back." But Dominic was already walking over. He stopped in front of the booth, looking down at the boy. Caleb didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared. "You got sharp eyes, kid," Dominic said. "You always watch people like that?" Caleb didn't answer. Dominic chuckled. "Smart. Keep your mouth shut, your eyes open. That's how you survive in this world." He reached out and ruffled Caleb's red hair. "Good kid." Then he turned and walked out, his men following. The door swung shut behind them and the bell chimed, cheerful and mocking. The diner was silent for a long moment. Then Hank Mercer set down his coffee cup. The sound sharpened the quiet. "How long, Nora?" Nora's shoulders sagged. 2 years. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "What would you have done, Colonel? Gone to the police?" He was the police. He's got half the department in his pocket and the other half too scared to move. Hank's jaw worked. He looked at Caleb, still standing in the booth, still holding that rag like it was the only solid thing in the world. "That boy's watching," Hank said quietly. "And boys who watch learn. You make sure he learns the right lessons." Nora looked at her son, and her heart broke a little more. Caleb went to school that morning like he always did. He sat in the back of the classroom like he always did. He kept his head down, did his work, and didn't make trouble. At lunch, Connor Voss found him. Connor was 9, a year older than Caleb, and 30 pounds heavier. He had his father's dark hair and his father's mean streak. The kind of cruelty that came from knowing you could get away with anything because of who your dad was. He shoved Caleb into the lockers hard enough to rattle metal. "Hey, Ginger," Connor said, grinning. "My dad says your mom pays him every week. Says she's smart. Unlike you." Caleb didn't respond. He'd learned that responding only made it worse. Connor grabbed Caleb's lunch bag and tossed it to one of his friends. "What did she pack you today? Leftover diner crap?" The friend opened the bag, pulled out a sandwich, and threw it on the ground. Stepped on it. Caleb watched. He didn't fight back. Fighting back meant detention. Detention meant his mom had to leave the diner to pick him up, and she couldn't afford to leave the diner. So he watched. He memorized Connor's face, the way he laughed, the way his friends laughed. He filed it all away in the part of his brain that kept track of things, the part that noticed when Dominic Voss limped slightly on his left leg, when he checked his phone every 15 minutes, when he wore the same watch every day, a silver Rolex with a scratched face. Details. Caleb collected details the way other kids collected baseball cards. But today, something was different. After Connor threw Caleb's sandwich on the ground, he didn't laugh like usual. He just stood there, staring at it. his face pale. "Connor, you okay?" one of his friends asked. Connor flinched. Yeah, I'm fine." But when he turned away, Caleb saw something in Connor's eyes he'd never seen before. Fear. Not of Caleb, of something else. Someone else. Caleb filed it away, another detail in his growing collection. When the bell rang, he picked up what was left of his sandwich, threw it away, and went back to class. That night, he sat at the little desk in his room and opened his notebook. It wasn't a school notebook. It was his private one, the one he kept hidden under his mattress. Inside were drawings, motorcycles mostly, Harley-Davidsons with their distinctive V-twin engines, Indians with their sleek lines, Triumphs with their classic British styling. Caleb had never ridden a motorcycle, had never even sat on one, but he dreamed about them the way some kids dreamed about sports cars or spaceships. Freedom on two wheels, the open road, escape. He was sketching a new design, something with a chopper-style frame and ape-hanger handlebars, when he heard voices from the diner. His room shared a wall with the main dining area. The wall was thin, sound carried. He set down his pencil and listened. "Can't keep doing this, Nora." That was Jack Holbrook, the trucker. His voice was low, concerned. "I don't have a choice, Jack." His mother's voice, tight with exhaustion. "There's always a choice. You could go to the police. Voss owns the police, you know that. Then go to the papers. Go to... And risk what? Him burning this place down? I've got a son to protect." A pause, then Jack's voice softer. "You can't live like this. I've lived through worse." Caleb heard footsteps, the sound of the door opening and closing. Then silence. He went back to his drawing, but his hands weren't steady anymore. The next morning, December 19th, Caleb woke up early, earlier than usual, 5 a.m. instead of 5:30. He couldn't sleep, something in his chest tight and anxious, a feeling he couldn't name. He got dressed in the dark and slipped out of his room. The diner was empty, the lights still off. His mother wouldn't be up for another 20 minutes. He sat in his usual booth, the one in the corner where he could see the whole room, and waited. At 6:45, the door opened, but it wasn't Hank Mercer. It was Dominic Voss and three of his men. They walked in like they owned the place, like the diner wasn't even open yet, like the rules didn't apply. Dominic went straight to the corner booth on the opposite side of the room, the one with a view of the street. His men followed. Caleb's heart started to pound. He should have gotten up, should have gone to the back, to his room, stayed out of sight. But something held him there. Curiosity, or maybe something deeper. The same instinct that made him watch people, made him collect details, made him notice things others missed. He stayed. Nora came out of the kitchen, saw them, and froze for just a second. Then she smoothed her apron and walked over. "Mr. Voss, we're not open yet." "Just coffee, Nora. We won't be long." She brought them coffee. 4 cups, set them down without a word, and turned to go. "Actually," Dominic said, "we'll take the back booth. More private." Nora's jaw tightened, but she nodded. The men moved to the booth farthest from the door, the one in the corner opposite Caleb. They sat with their backs to him. They didn't see the 8-year-old boy with red hair sitting perfectly still in the shadows. Caleb picked up a rag from the table next to him. He stood quietly and moved to the booth directly adjacent to theirs. He knelt down, pretending to wipe the bench seat, and he listened. Dominic's voice was low, but it carried. "He's coming at 11. Thinks he's selling the bike." "The Harley?" one of the men said. "Yeah, posted it online 2 days ago. Fat boy, 2015, 12,000 cash. I made contact, set up the meet here." "Why here?" "Because it's public. He thinks it's safe. And because I like sending messages where people can see them." Another voice, deeper. "What about the club? Hell's Angels don't take kindly to people messing with their own." Dominic laughed, low and cold. "That's the point. We take their road, Captain. We send a message. Either they leave Bakersfield or we make examples. They'll understand. And the plan? Simple. I sit down, negotiate, close the deal. I step outside to get the title from my car. That's the signal. You grab him, throw him in the van, black van 2 blocks down on 5th Street. Marcus is driving. We're gone in 60 seconds. What if he fights? He won't. We'll have 3-on-1 and he won't see it coming. By the time his club knows he's missing, we'll have him somewhere they'll never find. There was a pause. Then one of the men said, "What about witnesses?" "It's a diner. People come, people go. Nobody pays attention. And even if they do, nobody talks. Not in this neighborhood." Caleb's hands were shaking so hard he had to press them against the booth seat to keep them still. His heart hammered in his chest. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. He had heard everything. 11 a.m., a Harley, a Hells Angels road captain, a trap. He should tell his mom. He should tell Hank. He should... "Hey, kid." Caleb's blood went cold. He looked up. One of Dominic's men was standing over him, thick-necked and scowling. "What are you doing back here?" Caleb's mind raced. "Cleaning," he said, his voice small. "My mom told me to clean." The man stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at Dominic. Dominic glanced over, saw Caleb, and smiled. "Let him work. Just a kid." The man stepped back. Caleb stood, legs wobbling, and walked away. He didn't run. Running would draw attention. He walked slowly, calmly to the back, and then into his room. He closed the door and sat on his bed, shaking. Just a kid. That's what Dominic had said. Just a kid. Nobody important, nobody listening. Caleb clenched his fists. He thought about his father. About the uniform. About the phrase his mother always said. Your dad never walked away from someone who needed help. He opened his notebook to a blank page and wrote down everything he'd heard. Times, names, the black van on 5th Street, every detail. Then he closed the notebook and made a decision. At 10:30, Caleb was standing by the window, watching the street. His mother was behind the counter, serving the early lunch crowd. Hank Mercer had come and gone. The diner was busy, full of people who didn't know what was about to happen. Caleb's stomach was in knots. He'd spent the last 3 hours trying to figure out what to do. He couldn't tell his mom. She'd panic, call the police, and the police worked for Dominic. He couldn't tell Hank. The colonel was tough, but he was 68 years old and unarmed. He'd get himself hurt. And Caleb couldn't call the police himself. He was 8. They wouldn't believe him. That left one option. Warn the target. At 10:55, Caleb heard it. The deep, rumbling growl of a Harley-Davidson engine. Unmistakable. Powerful. The sound rolled down the street like thunder, and every head in the diner turned toward the window. Caleb's breath caught. The motorcycle pulled up to the curb and stopped. The engine cut off, and the sudden silence was almost deafening. The man who swung off the bike was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the kind of easy confidence that came from a life lived on the edge. He wore a black leather vest over a faded denim shirt, jeans with scuffed knees, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of road. The vest had patches, a skull with wings, the words Hells Angels, and below that is the Bakersfield chapter. On the back, in bold letters, Road Captain. His name was stitched above the skull, Wyatt Donovan. He was 42 years old. His face was weathered, lined with scars and sun, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent. The eyes of a man who had seen too much and learned from all of it. Wyatt pushed open the door and the bell chimed. Dominic Voss stood up from his booth, a smile on his face, hand extended. "Mr. Donovan, right on time. I appreciate punctuality." Wyatt shook his hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Voss? That's me. Have a seat." They sat across from each other in the booth. Dominic's men had moved to a different table, trying to look casual, but Caleb could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their eyes kept flicking to the door. Caleb moved closer, wiping down a table 2 booths away, close enough to hear, close enough to act. "Beautiful bike," Dominic said. 2015 Fat Boy, right? "Yeah, 60,000 miles, well-maintained. I've got the service records. I ran the VIN. Clean title, no accidents. I'm ready to close the deal if you are." Wyatt nodded slowly. "Cash?" Dominic pulled out an envelope, thick with bills. 12,000. "You can count it if you want." Wyatt didn't touch the envelope. He was watching Dominic the way a wolf watches a hunter. Something in his gut was telling him this wasn't right. "Title?" Wyatt said. "In my car. Give me 2 minutes, I'll grab it and we're done." Dominic stood, and that's when Caleb moved. He crossed the diner in 4 quick steps, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. He dropped to one knee next to Wyatt's booth, pretending to pick up a napkin that had fallen on the floor. He leaned in close, and he whispered, "Drive away. It's a trap. They're taking you." The words came out in a rush, barely audible, but Wyatt heard everyone. He didn't react, didn't turn his head, didn't look at Caleb, but his hand, resting on the table, clenched into a fist. Caleb stood and walked away, legs shaking, back to his table. He picked up the rag, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Wyatt pulled out his phone. He typed 3 words, fast. Code red now. Then he stood. Dominic was halfway to the door. He turned, confused. "Where are you going?" "Change of plans," Wyatt said. His voice was calm, steady, but there was steel underneath. "What? We had a deal." Wyatt walked past him out the door to his bike. Dominic followed, his face darkening. "Hey, where the hell?" And then the street filled with sound, the roar of engines. 8 of them. No, 10. Harley Davidsons coming from both ends of the block, converging on the diner like a pack of wolves answering a howl. They pulled up in a line, engines rumbling, chrome glinting in the winter sun. Men and women in leather vests, Hell's Angels patches on their backs, faces hard and ready. Dominic's face went pale. Wyatt swung onto his bike, fired up the engine. He looked at Dominic and his eyes were cold. "Next time," Wyatt said, "pick a better spot for an ambush." He kicked the bike into gear and rolled forward. The other Angels parted, then closed ranks behind him, forming a wall between Dominic and the street. One of them, a woman with a scar across her left cheek and eyes like ice, stepped off her bike and walked up to Dominic. Her name was Bridget O'Malley. She was 35, Irish-American, and had served 2 tours in Iraq as a Marine before the Hell's Angels became her family. "You, Voss?" she said. Dominic didn't answer. "Thought so. Let me make something clear. You come after one of ours, you come after all of us, and we don't play nice." Dominic's men had come out of the diner, but they stopped when they saw the bikes, stopped when they saw the numbers. 10 against 3. Bridget leaned in close. "Walk away, now, while you still can." Dominic's jaw worked, his hands clenched, but he nodded, turned, and walked to his car. His men followed. The black sedan pulled away, tires screeching. The Hell's Angels didn't follow. They just stood there, engines idling, a silent promise. Wyatt Donovan looked back at the diner. Through the window, he saw a small figure standing by a booth. Red hair, green eyes, a boy no more than 8 years old. Their eyes met. Wyatt nodded. Caleb nodded back. Then Wyatt turned his bike and rode away, the other Angels following, their engines fading into the distance until the street was quiet again. Inside the diner, Nora Brennan stood behind the counter, her face white, her hands shaking. She didn't understand what had just happened, didn't know why the bikers had come, why Dominic had left, why the tension in the air felt like the moment before a storm breaks. She looked at her son. Caleb was standing in the middle of the floor, the rag still in his hand, staring at the door. "Caleb," she said, "what did you do?" Caleb turned to her, and for the first time in his life, he didn't look like a child. He looked like something older, something forged in the same fire that had taken his father. "I did what was right," he said. Before Nora could respond, the door opened again. Wyatt Donovan walked back in. The diner went silent. Every customer, every sound, everything stopped. Wyatt walked straight to Caleb. He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "What's your name, son?" "Caleb," the boy said. His voice didn't shake. "Caleb Brennan." "Caleb." Wyatt repeated it like he was committing it to memory. "You just saved my life. How'd you know?" "I heard them," Caleb said. "They were planning it this morning. They didn't think I was listening." Wyatt studied the boy's face, saw the intelligence in those green eyes, the courage that had pushed him to act when anyone else would have stayed silent. "You've got real courage, kid, more than most adults I know." He stood, turned to Nora. "You his mother?" Nora nodded, unable to speak. "Then you should know, your son's the bravest person in this room." Wyatt pulled a card from his vest pocket and set it on the counter. "Voss will come back. When he does, you call me, day or night, understand?" Nora picked up the card with trembling hands. Wyatt Reaper Donovan, Hell's Angels MC, Bakersfield chapter, a phone number. Wyatt looked at Caleb one more time. You ever need anything, kid, you call that number. A debt like this doesn't go unpaid. Then he turned and walked out. The door swung shut. The bell chimed. And Caleb Brennan stood in the middle of his mother's diner, his heart still racing, knowing that everything had just changed. He didn't know that Dominic Voss was already planning his revenge. He didn't know that in 24 hours, everything he loved would be threatened. He didn't know that the whisper he'd spoken would echo farther than he could ever imagine. But he would learn. The storm was coming, and this time there would be no running from it. The night after Caleb whispered those 4 words, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the diner settle into silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock on the wall, his mother's footsteps in the next room, pacing, pacing, never stopping. She hadn't said much after Wyatt left, just pulled Caleb close, held him tight enough that he could feel her heart hammering against his cheek, and whispered, "Domain, don't ever scare me like that again." But she didn't tell him he'd done wrong. That meant something. Caleb reached under his mattress and pulled out his notebook, the one with the motorcycle sketches. He opened it to a blank page and started drawing. Not a bike this time. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, leather vest with patches. Wyatt Donovan, road captain. The man who'd listened when an 8-year-old whispered a warning. The man who'd come back to say thank you. Caleb's pencil moved across the page, and he thought about the look in Wyatt's eyes. Not pity, not dismissal. Respect. Nobody had ever looked at Caleb Brennan with respect before. He was still drawing when he heard the car pull up outside. Caleb froze. The pencil stopped mid-stroke. It was 2:17 in the morning. Nobody came to the diner at 2:17 in the morning. He slipped out of bed, moved to the window, and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. A black sedan, 4 doors, tinted windows, the same car Dominic Voss had driven away in that afternoon. The engine idled for a long moment. Then the headlights cut off. Nobody got out. Caleb's heart started to pound. He pressed his face closer to the glass, trying to see inside the car, but the windows were too dark. Then the driver's side door opened. Dominic Voss stepped out. He stood on the sidewalk, lit by the yellow glow of the streetlight, and he looked directly at Caleb's window. Even from this distance, even in the dark, Caleb could see the expression on his face. Cold, calculated, angry. Dominic didn't move, didn't walk toward the diner. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring. A message. I know what you did. I know where you live. I know where you sleep. Caleb's breath fogged the window. He didn't move, didn't blink. After what felt like an eternity, Dominic got back in the car. The engine revved once, loud enough to wake anyone who might still be sleeping. Then he drove away. Caleb stayed at the window for another hour, watching the empty street, waiting for the car to come back. It didn't, but he knew it would. Eventually. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. Caleb went through his usual routine like a robot. Dress, help his mother open the diner, wipe tables, refill napkins, stay invisible. But today, invisible didn't feel safe. Today, it felt like a target. At 6 a.m., Colonel Hank Mercer walked through the door. He took one look at Nora's face, pale and drawn, and sat down at his usual booth without a word. When she brought his coffee, he caught her wrist gently. What happened? Nora glanced at Caleb, who was pretending to clean the same table he'd cleaned 10 minutes ago. Not here, she said quietly. Hank nodded. After the breakfast rush, we talk. By 7:30, most of the early crowd had cleared out. Jack Holbrook was nursing his 3rd cup of coffee in the corner booth. Eleanor Walsh sat at the counter, reading the newspaper. The diner was quiet enough for conversation, but public enough to feel safe. Nora locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and sat down across from Hank. Caleb stood nearby, arms crossed, listening. Nora told Hank everything, about the whisper, about Wyatt Donovan, about the Hells Angels arriving like the cavalry, about Dominic leaving, defeated but not broken, and about the car outside their window at 2 in the morning. Hank's jaw tightened with every word. When Nora finished, he was silent for a long moment, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He's sending a message, Hank said finally, testing you, seeing if you'll break. I know, Nora whispered. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Nora looked at her son. Caleb stared back, his green eyes steady, unflinching. I don't know, she admitted. Run, hide, pack up and leave Bakersfield? You could, Hank said. Take the mom, get on a bus, start over somewhere else. Fresno maybe, Sacramento, somewhere Voss can't reach you. And what happens to the diner? Nora's voice cracked. This place is all I have, Colonel. It's all we have. Brian and I planned this before he deployed. This was supposed to be our dream, our future. Dreams don't mean much if you're not alive to see them. Caleb spoke up. His voice was quiet but firm. I'm not running. Both adults turned to look at him. Caleb, Nora started. No, Mom. Caleb stepped forward. Dad didn't run from the bad guys. You didn't run when Dad died and we had nothing. We don't run now. Hank leaned back, studying the boy. There was something in Caleb's face that reminded him of young soldiers he'd commanded in the Gulf. Green, untested, but with a core of steel that couldn't be taught. You understand what you're saying, son? Staying means Voss will come back, and next time it won't be a car outside your window. It'll be worse. I know, Caleb said, but running means he wins. And if he wins here, he wins everywhere. He'll do this to someone else, and someone else until someone stands up. Nora closed her eyes. You're 8 years old, baby. You shouldn't have to stand up to men like Dominic Voss. But I already did, Caleb said simply. Yesterday, when I warned Mr. Donovan. I already stood up, so now I gotta finish it. The words hung in the air. Hank Mercer had seen a lot in his 68 years. War, loss, men crumbling under pressure, and men rising to meet it. And in that moment, he saw something in Caleb Brennan that most people never find in a lifetime. Purpose, Mom. All right, Hank said quietly. He looked at Nora. You want to stay and fight? I'll help you. But we do this smart. We don't go toe-to-toe with Voss. We build a defense, we gather allies, and we make sure that boy stays safe. Nora nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Colonel. Don't thank me yet, Hank said. He pulled out his phone. First thing we do is call that biker. Wyatt Donovan arrived at the diner 30 minutes later. He came alone this time, his Harley rumbling to a stop outside. He killed the engine, swung off, and walked in like he'd been coming here for years. Hank stood to meet him. The two men sized each other up, colonel and road captain. Different worlds, different wars, but the same language. Wyatt extended his hand. Wyatt Donovan. Hank Mercer. They shook, firm and brief. You the one Caleb warned yesterday? That's me. Then I owe you a conversation. They sat, Nora poured coffee. Caleb stood by the counter, watching, listening. Voss came by last night, Hank said. 2 in the morning. Sat outside in his car, staring at the boy's window. Intimidation tactic. Wyatt's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold. He make any threats? Didn't have to, the message was clear. Wyatt nodded slowly. Voss is ex-cop. He knows how to play the game. Won't do anything that leaves evidence. He'll use fear, pressure, make life unbearable until you leave on your own. Or he escalates, burns the place down, makes it look like an accident. Either way, he wins. Nora's hands clenched around her coffee cup. So what do we do? Wyatt looked at Caleb. What do you want to do, kid? Caleb met his gaze. I want to stop him. Even if it's dangerous? Yes. Even if it means things get worse before they get better? Yes. Wyatt smiled just a little. You got your mother's courage and your father's stubbornness. Caleb blinked. You knew my dad? No, Wyatt said, but I know the kind of man who raises a son like you, takes guts to serve, takes more to leave a family behind, knowing they'll have to be strong without you. He turned to Nora. Your boy saved my life. That's a debt I don't take lightly. You want protection? You got it. Hell's Angels will post watch, day and night. Voss won't touch you. I can't pay you, Nora said quietly. Didn't ask you to. Why would you do this for us? Wyatt leaned back. You know what Hell's Angels means? People think it's about bikes and leather and rebellion. Maybe it started that way, but it's more than that now. It's about brotherhood, loyalty, Protecting people who can't protect themselves. He looked at Caleb. Your son did that yesterday. Warned a stranger. Put himself at risk for someone he didn't even know. That's the code we live by. So yeah, we'll stand with you, because that's what we do. Hank nodded. What's the plan? Defense first. We rotate guards. I'll have 2 people here at all times, day and night. Voss won't make a move if he knows we're watching. And if he does, then we respond, but not with violence, not unless he starts it. We're not criminals, Colonel. We've got lawyers, contacts, people who owe us favors. We play this smart. We can bury Voss without throwing a single punch. And the boy? Hank asked. How do we keep him safe? Wyatt looked at Caleb. Kid, you listening? Yes, sir. Good. Rule number 1, you don't play hero again. You see something, you tell us. You don't act alone, understand? Caleb hesitated, then nodded. Rule number 2, you stay sharp, eyes open, ears open. Voss is going to look for weaknesses. Don't give him any. Yes, sir. And rule number 3. Wyatt stood, walked over to Caleb and knelt down to his level. You remember that courage isn't the same as stupid. Being brave means knowing when to fight and when to be smart. Your dad knew that, so should you. Caleb's throat tightened. He nodded again, not trusting his voice. Wyatt stood and turned to Nora. We start tonight. I'll have Bridget and another rider here by 8 p.m. They'll stay until dawn. We'll rotate shifts. Thank you, Nora whispered. Wyatt nodded and headed for the door. But before he left, he stopped and looked back at Caleb. Hey, kid, you like bikes? Caleb's eyes lit up. Yes, sir. Come outside. I'll show you something. Caleb followed Wyatt out to the Harley. Up close, the motorcycle was even more beautiful than in his drawings. All chrome and black paint, the engine gleaming in the morning sun. Wyatt ran his hand along the fuel tank. 2015 Fat Boy. 60,000 miles. This bike's been with me through hell and back. Literally. It's beautiful, Caleb breathed. You ever been on a bike? No, sir. Wyatt grinned. Well, can't have that. He swung it onto the seat and patted the space behind him. Hop on. Caleb's eyes went wide. Really? Ask your mom first. Caleb ran back inside. Mom, can I? Nora was already at the door, arms crossed, trying to look stern, but there was a smile tugging at her lips. 5 minutes, and you wear a helmet. Wyatt pulled a second helmet from the saddlebag and handed it to Caleb. It was too big, sliding down over his eyes, but Caleb didn't care. He climbed onto the bike behind Wyatt, his small hands gripping the grab rail. Hold on tight, Wyatt said, and don't lean. Just move with the bike. He fired up the engine. The rumble shook Caleb's entire body, a deep, powerful vibration that felt like a heartbeat. And then they were moving, slow at first, just a loop around the block. But even at 15 miles per hour, Caleb felt like he was flying. The wind in his face, the rumble beneath him, the world rushing past. Freedom. When they pulled back up to the diner, Caleb was grinning so wide his face hurt. Wyatt helped him off. What did you think? That was amazing. Yeah? Wyatt smiled. You keep doing the right thing, kid. Maybe one day you'll have your own. Caleb's grin faded a little. Wyatt? Yeah? Why do you help people? You don't even know us. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the street, at the diner, at the life Nora and Caleb had built from nothing. Someone gave me a second chance when I had nothing, he said finally. A Hell's Angel I'd never met. He saw I was in trouble and helped me. No questions asked. That's the code. That's what we do. He turned back to Caleb. You gave me a chance yesterday when you warned me. Now I'm returning the favor. That's how it works. Caleb nodded, understanding more than Wyatt realized. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet, kid. This is just the beginning. That night, as promised, 2 Hells Angels arrived at 8 p.m. The first was Bridget O'Malley, the woman with the scar and ice chip eyes. The second was a man in his 50s named Garrett Diesel Murphy, built like a linebacker and tattooed from neck to wrists. They parked their bikes out front, visible, a statement. Bridget walked into the diner, looked around, and nodded approvingly. Good sight lines, 2 exits, windows on all sides, defensible. Nora stared. You talk like a soldier. Marine, Bridget said. 2 tours in Iraq, Fallujah, Ramadi, Got out in 2009, joined the club in 2010. She extended her hand. Bridget O'Malley. Nora shook it. Nora Brennan, Navy Hospital Corpsman 2010 to 2016. Bridget's eyebrows rose. No shit. Where'd you serve? Bahrain mostly, sometime on the Lincoln Carrier Group. Corpsman. Bridget nodded with respect. You see combat? Medical evac during Syrian operations. Nothing like Fallujah. Combat's combat. Bridget glanced at Caleb. This the kid who saved Wyatt? That's my son. Bridget walked over to Caleb and crouched down. You've got courage most adults don't have, kid. Standing up to Voss, that takes real backbone. Caleb swallowed hard. Is he really that bad? Worse, he was a cop for 15 years, detective, good at his job until he figured out he could make more money protecting criminals than catching them. Got caught taking bribes 3 years ago. Department gave him the choice, resign or face charges. He resigned, started his own operation. Protection rackets, loan sharking, intimidation. The cops can't touch him because half of them are on his payroll. The other half are too scared. But you're not scared, Caleb said. Bridget smiled, cold and sharp. I've been shot at by insurgents with AK-47s, kid. Dominic Voss doesn't scare me. She stood and turned to Nora. Here's how this works. Diesel and I will be here every night, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. We'll rotate with the other riders during the day. You see anything suspicious? You tell us. You don't engage. You don't confront. You let us handle it. What if he comes during the day? Nora asked. He won't, not at first. He'll test you at night when it's dark, when you're vulnerable. He wants you scared, wants you to make mistakes. Bridget pulled out a phone, an old flip model, and handed it to Nora. This is a burner. Wyatt's number is programmed in. Anything happens, you call, day or night. We'll be here in 5 minutes. Nora took the phone, her hands shaking slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your kid. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. Caleb went to school, came home, helped his mother, did his homework. At night, the Hells Angels would arrive, park their bikes, and stand watch. Bridget usually took the first shift. Diesel took the second. Sometimes others came. A man named Lyle with a gray beard and kind eyes. A woman named Cassidy who barely spoke but saw everything. Dominic didn't come back, not physically, but his presence was everywhere. On the third night, someone slashed the tires on Nora's car. She came out in the morning to find all 4 flat, the rubber cut clean. On the 5th night, the diner's back window shattered. A brick lay in the middle of the floor, wrapped in newspaper. No note, no message, just destruction. Each time, Bridget and the others filed reports, called their contacts, documented everything. But there was no proof. No cameras caught the vandals. No witnesses came forward. Dominic was too smart for that. Caleb watched it all with growing frustration. He wanted to do something, to fight back. But Wyatt's words echoed in his head. Courage isn't the same as stupid. So he did what he did best. He watched. He observed. He collected details. At school, Connor Voss continued his pattern. The bullying persisted. Shoves, stolen lunches, mocking words. The teachers still looked away. But Caleb noticed something else. Connor's eyes, when he thought no one was watching, held that same fear Caleb had seen before. Growing stronger, more desperate. One afternoon, Colonel Hank pulled Caleb aside. Walk with me, son. They walked around the block, Hank's hands in his pockets, his pace slow and measured. You doing okay? Hank asked. Yes, sir. Don't lie to an old soldier. I can see it in your eyes. You're angry. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then, I'm tired of being pushed around. At school, Connor does whatever he wants. Here, his dad does whatever he wants, and nobody stops them. That frustrates you? Yeah, good. Hank stopped walking and turned to face Caleb. You should be frustrated. Anger at injustice is a good thing. It means you still care. But anger without discipline is just rage, and rage gets people killed. So what do I do with it? You channel it, you use it, you let it make you sharp, not reckless. Hank pulled something from his jacket pocket, A small book, worn and dog-eared. Sun Tzu's Art of War. Read this, Hank said. It's about strategy, about thinking 3 steps ahead, about winning wars before the first shot is fired. Your enemy right now is stronger than you, richer than you, more connected than you. You can't beat him with fists. You beat him with brains. Caleb took the book, turning it over in his hands. My dad read this, he said quietly. I know, I gave it to him. Hank's voice softened. Your father was a good soldier, Caleb. Not because he was the strongest or the fastest, because he was smart. He thought, he planned, he protected his people. That's what made him great. And that's what'll make you great too. Caleb looked up, tears stinging his eyes. I miss him. I know, son, but he's still here. In you, in the way you think, the way you care, the way you stand up when others sit down. Hank put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. He'd be proud of you. I know I am. On the 7th night, Caleb couldn't sleep again. He lay in bed, listening to the rumble of motorcycles outside. Bridget and Diesel were on watch. The diner was locked tight. His mother was asleep in the next room. But something felt wrong. Caleb sat up, straining his ears. There, a sound, faint, metal on metal. He slipped out of bed and crept to the window. The street was empty. The motorcycles were parked out front, their riders sitting on the curb, drinking coffee from thermoses. But in the alley behind the diner, something moved. A shadow, low to the ground. Caleb's heart started to race. He grabbed the burner phone Bridget had given him. She'd insisted he have one too, and dialed. Bridget answered on the first ring. Yeah? It's Caleb. Someone's in the back alley. Stay inside, lock your door, we're on it. Caleb watched through the window as Bridget and Diesel moved, fast and silent. They disappeared around the side of the building. 30 seconds later, Caleb heard shouting. A crash, then silence. His phone buzzed. Bridget's voice. Clear, you can come out. Caleb ran outside. His mother was already there, wrapped in a bathrobe, her face pale. In the alley, Bridget had a man pinned against the wall. He was young, maybe 20, with a shaved head and a look of pure terror. At his feet was a gas can and a box of matches. Diesel was on the phone with the police. Nora stared at the gas can. He was going to burn it down. Yep, Bridget said. She looked at the man. Who sent you? The man didn't answer. Bridget tightened her grip. I'll ask once more. Who sent you? I don't know his name, the man gasped. He paid me $500, said torch the place, make it look like an accident. Describe him. Tall, dark hair, scar on his head, drove a black sedan. Bridget looked at Nora. Voss. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They took the man into custody, took statements, took the evidence. But everyone knew how this would play out. The arsonist would claim he acted alone. There'd be no connection to Dominic. No proof. As the police cars drove away, Nora sank onto the curb, her head in her hands. Caleb sat beside her. Mom, I can't do this anymore, baby. Her voice broke. I can't keep fighting. I can't keep putting you in danger. We're not giving up, Caleb said firmly. Caleb, no, Mom, we're not. He looked at Bridget, at Diesel, at the motorcycles gleaming under the streetlights. We've got help. We've got people who care. And we're going to make Dominic Voss pay for what he's done. Bridget smiled. Kid's got a point. Nora looked at her son, this 8-year-old boy with fire in his eyes and steel in his spine, and she realized something. He wasn't running. And if he wasn't running, neither could she. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we fight. Caleb took her hand, and together they stood up. The next morning brought a new threat. An envelope slid under the diner door before dawn. Nora found it when she came out to prep for opening. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Official letterhead. Notice of lease termination. 30 days to vacate. Her hands shook as she read it. Fire code violations. Safety concerns. The landlord was terminating their lease. When Wyatt arrived an hour later with Bridget, Nora showed him the notice. He's escalating, Wyatt said, his jaw tight. Can't burn you out, so he's pushing you out legally. What can we do? Nora asked. Fight it in court? That takes months. Money we don't have. There's another option, Bridget said. She looked at Wyatt, and something unspoken passed between them. We take the fight to him. How? Caleb asked. Information, Wyatt said. Voss has been running his operation for 3 years. That's 3 years of bribes, intimidation, extortion. He's got enemies, people he's squeezed, witnesses who are too scared to talk. We find them. We convince them to testify. We build a case so airtight that even his cop friends can't protect him. Hank Mercer, who'd arrived with the bikers, nodded slowly. It's risky. The people Voss has dirt on won't talk easy. They're terrified. They're not the only ones terrified, Nora said quietly. She looked at Caleb. My son shouldn't have to live in fear. None of us should. Then we end it, Wyatt said. Today, we start gathering evidence. We go to every business owner, every person Voss has squeezed. We show them they're not alone, that if they stand together, they're stronger than him. And who's going to convince them? Nora asked. They won't trust a bunch of bikers. Wyatt smiled just a little. They'll trust you. Nora blinked. Me? You're one of them, a small business owner, a veteran, a mother protecting her child. You're not some outsider, you're their neighbor. Wyatt leaned forward. Voss has power because people are divided, scared, isolated. You bring them together, you take away his greatest weapon. Caleb spoke up. I'll help. Caleb, no, Nora started. Mom, Caleb's voice was steady. I started this. Let me help finish it. Nora looked at her son, at the determination in his green eyes, and she saw Brian, saw the man she'd married, the man who'd stood for what was right even when it cost him everything. Okay, she whispered. We do this together. They started with Eleanor Walsh. Eleanor owned the second-hand shop 3 blocks down, a cramped store filled with forgotten treasures and old grief. She was 54, widowed, and had been paying Dominic Voss $200 a month for the past 2 years. When Nora and Caleb walked in, Eleanor was behind the counter, sorting through a box of old books. She looked up, saw them, and her face went pale. Nora, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Ellie. Eleanor glanced at the window, nervous. If this is about Voss, it is. Then I can't help you. I'm sorry, but I can't. Nora walked to the counter. How much is he taking from you? That's not $200 a month, 3, more? Eleanor's hands shook. It doesn't matter. I pay, he leaves me alone. That's how it works. For how long? Caleb said quietly. Eleanor looked at the boy. What? How long are you going to keep paying him? Caleb asked. Until you can't afford it anymore? Until you lose your shop? Until you have nothing left? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. What choice do I have? He's got the police. He's got the city. If I don't pay, he destroys me. He's destroying you anyway, Nora said gently. Just slower. So what do you want me to do? Stand up to him? Testify? I've got a daughter in college, Nora. I can't risk. We're all risking something, Nora interrupted. But we're doing it together. You, me, Jack Holbrook, every person Voss has squeezed. If we stand together, he can't touch us. You don't know that. I know this. Nora's voice hardened. My 8-year-old son stood up to Dominic Voss, warned a stranger, saved a man's life, put himself in danger because it was the right thing to do. If he can be that brave, so can we. Eleanor looked at Caleb, really looked at him, saw the freckles, the red hair, the steady eyes that belonged to someone far older than 8. What did you do? Eleanor asked him. Caleb told her about overhearing the conspiracy, about the whisper, about the Hell's Angels, about the retaliations, the vandalism, the attempted arson, the eviction notice. When he finished, Eleanor was crying openly. You're just a child, she whispered. Yes, ma'am, Caleb said, but I'm not going to let that stop me from doing what's right. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a ledger. Old, leather-bound, filled with handwritten entries. I've been keeping records, she said. Every payment, every threat, every time one of his men came in here and implied what would happen if I didn't cooperate. It's all here. Nora took the ledger, her hands trembling. Ellie, I'll testify, Eleanor said. if you promise me one thing. What? That you'll protect that boy, because if Voss finds out what you're doing, he won't stop at property damage. We'll protect him, a voice said from the doorway. Wyatt Donovan stood there, Bridget beside him. They'd been waiting outside, watching. Eleanor stared at them. Who are you? Friends, Wyatt said simply, and we keep our promises. Over the next 3 days, Nora and Caleb visited 14 businesses. Jack Holbrook, the trucker. He'd been paying Voss $50 a week to guarantee his truck and wouldn't be vandalized when he parked overnight in Bakersfield. Martin Green, who owned the hardware store. He'd paid $2,000 in protection fees over the past year. Yolanda Pritchard, who ran the laundromat. She'd been assaulted by one of Voss's men when she'd refused to pay. The police report went nowhere. One by one, they told their stories. And one by one, they agreed to testify. By the end of the third day, they had 11 witnesses and a mountain of evidence. Hank Mercer took it all to his contact in the district attorney's office. A woman named Catherine Reeves, 48, career prosecutor, and one of the few people in Bakersfield who wasn't afraid of Dominic Voss. She sat in Hank's car, reading through the ledgers, the bank statements, the photographs of vandalism, the police reports that had been buried. This is solid, she said finally. Real solid. With this many witnesses, I can get a warrant, maybe even a grand jury indictment. How long? Hank asked. 48 hours to get the warrant, another week to convene the grand jury. We don't have a week. Voss is escalating. He tried to burn down their diner. Catherine's jaw tightened. Then we move faster. I'll file for an emergency warrant. Judge Brennan owes me a favor. Judge Brennan? Hank raised an eyebrow. Any relation to... No, Catherine said. Different family. But he's clean. One of the few judges Voss doesn't own. She looked out the window at the diner, where Caleb was sweeping the front steps, Bridget watching from her bike. That's the kid? Catherine asked. That's him. He's 8 years old. Yeah. And he started all of this by warning a biker. Yeah. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then, I've got a son, 10 years old. He spends his days playing video games and complaining about homework. That kid out there, he's got more courage in his little finger than most adults have in their whole body. I know, Hank said quietly. That's why we can't let Voss win. Catherine nodded. Give me 24 hours. I'll have that warrant. The storm was about to break, and this time when it came, it would wash everything clean. But Dominic Voss wasn't sitting idle. On the fourth night after the attempted arson, something changed. Something that would force everything into the open. Connor Voss didn't come home from school. The call came at 6 p.m., Dominic's voice on the phone, cold and clipped. Nora, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Then listen, your boy Caleb has been causing problems. Talking to people, asking questions, stirring up trouble. He's telling the truth. The truth is expensive, Nora, and I don't think you can afford it. A pause. My son Connor is missing. Nora's blood went cold. What? Disappeared after school. Didn't come home. Last person who saw him said he was talking to a red-headed kid. Your kid. Caleb had nothing to do with... I know that, Dominic interrupted. But the police don't. And if I file a report saying I believe your son knows something about my son's disappearance, well, that opens up a whole investigation, doesn't it? CPS gets involved. Questions about your fitness as a parent. Questions about the environment you're raising him in. Bikers coming and going at all hours. Attempted arson. Violence. Nora's hand clenched around the phone. You wouldn't. Try me. Dominic's voice dropped to a whisper. Drop this crusade. Send your witnesses home. Forget everything you've seen and heard. Do that, and Connor comes home safe. My investigation ends. Life goes back to normal. And if I don't, then I destroy you. Legally, publicly, completely. And your son gets to watch. The line went dead. Nora stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Caleb walked in from his room. Mom, what's wrong? She looked at him, this 8-year-old boy who'd started a revolution with a whisper, and she felt something break inside her. We have to stop, she whispered. What? The investigation, the witnesses, all of it. We have to stop. Hilmer, Before she could answer, Wyatt burst through the door, Bridget right behind him. "We've got a problem," Wyatt said. "Connor Voss is missing." "I know," Nora said. "Dominic just called. He's threatening to blame Caleb unless we back off." Wyatt's face darkened. "Son of a bitch." "It's worse," Bridget said. She held up her phone. "I've got contacts in the department. Dominic filed a missing persons report 20 minutes ago. Named Caleb as a potential witness. CPS has already been alerted." "They're going to take him," Nora breathed. "They're going to take my son." "No," Caleb said. His voice was sharp, cutting through the panic. "They're not." Everyone turned to look at him. "Caleb," Nora said slowly. "What do you mean?" "Because I know where Connor is," Caleb said. They stared at him. "You saw him after school?" Nora asked. "Yeah, I followed him." "Why?" "Because something's been different about him," Caleb said. "The fear in his eyes, the way he's been acting. I wanted to understand." Wyatt knelt down. "Where is he, Caleb?" "The old railroad yard on 5th Street, the abandoned one. I heard him on the phone crying. He said, 'I can't do this anymore, Dad. I can't be like you.'" Wyatt and Bridget exchanged glances. "He ran away from his father," Bridget said. "Yeah," Caleb said, "and now his dad is using it to hurt us." "Did you talk to Connor?" Wyatt asked. "I tried, but he saw me and ran. I think he's hiding in one of the old train cars." Hank stood. "We need to find him. Now, before Voss spins this into something it's not." "If we find him," Nora said, "and bring him back, Voss can't use this against us." "More than that," Wyatt said. "If Connor ran away, it means he's scared of his father. That's leverage. A scared kid might talk." "He's 9 years old," Nora protested. "Old enough to know right from wrong," Bridget said, "and maybe old enough to testify." They found Connor Voss 2 hours later. He was hiding in an old boxcar at the abandoned railroad yard, curled up in the corner, shivering. When he saw Caleb, he flinched. "Stay away from me." Caleb stopped, hands raised. "I'm not going to hurt you." "My dad says you're trying to destroy him." "Your dad is trying to destroy us," Caleb said quietly. "But I think you already know that." Connor's face crumpled. He was bigger than Caleb, older, meaner. But right now, he looked small, broken. "I don't want to be like him," Connor whispered. "I don't want to hurt people. But he says that's what strong people do. That's what men do." "That's not what men do," Hank said, stepping forward. The old colonel's voice was gentle but firm. "Real men protect people. They stand up for what's right. They don't bully. They don't threaten. And they sure as hell don't teach their sons to do those things." Connor looked at Hank, then at Caleb. "Why are you here? I've been awful to you." "Because you're scared," Caleb said. "And scared people do bad things sometimes. But you can stop. You can be better." Connor's shoulders shook. "If I go back, he'll make me lie. He'll make me say you kidnapped me or something. And I'll have to do it because he's my dad." "No," Nora said, kneeling down. "You don't have to do anything. We can protect you. We can—" "You can't protect me from him," Connor said. "Nobody can." "Yes, we can," a new voice said. Catherine Reeves stepped into the boxcar, a police officer behind her, but not one of Voss's men. This was Detective Marcus Webb, one of the few clean cops left in Bakersfield. "Connor Voss," Catherine said. "My name is Catherine Reeves. I'm with the district attorney's office, and I need to ask you some questions about your father." Connor looked terrified. "He'll kill me." "No, he won't, because as of 10 minutes ago, Dominic Voss is under arrest." The warrant had come through. Judge Brennan had signed it at 8 p.m., and by 8:15, Detective Webb and 6 federal agents had surrounded Dominic Voss's home. He'd been taken into custody without incident, charged with racketeering, extortion, bribery, and conspiracy to commit arson. The evidence was overwhelming. 11 witnesses, financial records, testimony from business owners, and now a 9-year-old boy who'd run away from his father because he couldn't stand to be part of it anymore. Connor Voss sat in Catherine's office, Nora beside him, and he told the truth about the threats, the payments, the vandalism his father ordered, the fear he'd lived with every day, knowing that if he didn't do what his father said, he'd be punished. Or worse, that his father would hurt someone else. When he finished, he was crying. "I'm sorry," he said to Caleb. "I'm so sorry for everything I did to you." Caleb looked at the boy who'd tormented him for months. The boy who'd pushed him, stolen from him, mocked him, and he said, "I forgive you." The trial took 3 months. Dominic Voss hired the best lawyers money could buy. They argued entrapment, insufficient evidence, unreliable witnesses. They attacked Nora's character, questioning her fitness as a parent. They called Wyatt and the Hells Angels a criminal organization. But the evidence held. And when Connor Voss took the stand, 9 years old and trembling, and told the jury what his father had done, what he'd taught him to do, there was no more room for doubt. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Dominic Voss was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for 10. 6 months later, Brennan's roadside diner was still standing. The eviction notice had been thrown out. The landlord had apologized, claiming he had been misled about code violations. The diner had been repainted, the broken windows replaced, the parking lot repaved. Business was better than ever. On a warm June morning, Caleb stood outside the diner, watching as a line of motorcycles pulled up to the curb. Hells Angels, 24 of them, engines rumbling like thunder. Wyatt dismounted and walked over. "You ready, kid?" Caleb nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. The bikers gathered in a semicircle. Nora stood beside Caleb, one hand on his shoulder. Hank was there, ramrod straight in his dress uniform. Eleanor, Jack, Martin, and the other business owners who testified stood nearby. And in the center, Bridget O'Malley held a leather vest. Small, child-sized, custom-made. On the back was a patch. Not the full Hells Angels insignia. Caleb was too young for that. But something else. Something special. A guardian angel with motorcycle wings. And below it, words stitched in silver thread. "The boy who saved a life." Bridget stepped forward and held out the vest. "Caleb Brennan," she said, her voice carrying. "6 months ago, you did something most adults wouldn't have the guts to do. You saw danger, and you acted. You whispered a warning that saved a man's life. And then, when the consequences came, you didn't run. You stood your ground. You gathered people. You fought back. And you won." She draped the vest over Caleb's shoulders. It fit perfectly. "This patch means your family," Bridget continued. "Not a full member, you're too young for that, but an honorary brother, someone we'll stand with, someone we'll protect, someone who embodies the code we live by: loyalty, courage, and protecting those who can't protect themselves." The bikers erupted in cheers, engines revved. Caleb felt tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling wider than he ever had. Wyatt knelt down in front of him. "How's it feel, kid?" "Like I finally did something that mattered," Caleb said. "You did more than that," Wyatt said. "You changed this town. You showed people that one voice, even a small one, can make a difference." He stood and looked at the crowd. "You should all be proud. This kid right here, he's what courage looks like." Nora pulled Caleb close, kissing the top of his head. "Your father would be so proud, baby." Caleb touched the vest, his fingers tracing the patch. "You think he knows?" "I think," Nora said softly, "that wherever he is, he's watching. And he's smiling." 5 years later, Caleb Brennan stood in the diner, now 13 years old, tall and lean, his red hair darker but still distinctive. It was early morning, and he was helping his mother prep for the day. The diner was thriving now. They'd expanded, added a patio, hired 3 employees. Nora had married Jack Holbrook the previous summer, and Jack's steady presence had brought a stability to their lives that Caleb hadn't realized they'd been missing. Colonel Hank Mercer, now 73, was still the first customer every morning. He sat in his usual booth, reading the paper, sipping his black coffee. Wyatt still stopped by once a week, always on Wednesdays, always at noon. Sometimes he brought other riders. Sometimes he came alone. But he always made time to talk to Caleb. Today, Wyatt walked in with a manila envelope. "Got something for you, kid," he said, sliding it across the counter. Caleb opened it. Inside was a packet of documents, applications, scholarships, information about a vocational program for motorcycle mechanics. "I talked to some people," Wyatt said. "There's a program starting next year. Teaches kids about bike repair, customization, engineering, full scholarship, if you're interested. Caleb's eyes widened. Seriously? You've been drawing bikes in that notebook of yours for 5 years. Figure it's time you learned to build one for real. Caleb looked at his mother. Nora was smiling, tears in her eyes. You should do it, baby, she said. But the diner. We'll be here, Nora interrupted. This is your dream. Your father and I, we got ours. Now it's time for you to chase yours. Caleb looked down at the application, his hands shaking slightly. Then he looked at Wyatt. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. Don't thank me yet, Wyatt said. You've still got to get accepted. I will, Caleb said, and there was no doubt in his voice. That night, as Caleb lay in bed, he pulled out his old notebook, the one with the motorcycle sketches, the one he'd been keeping since he was 8 years old. He flipped through the pages, hundreds of drawings, designs, dreams, and on the last page, in his father's handwriting, something Nora had written there years ago, transcribing words Brian had said before his last deployment, were 4 sentences. Be brave, son. Stand up for what's right. Protect those who can't protect themselves. And never forget, the smallest voice can change the world. Caleb touched the words, then closed the notebook. Tomorrow he'd start the application. Tomorrow he'd take the next step. But tonight he allowed himself to remember, to think about the 8-year-old boy who'd whispered 4 words to a stranger, who'd stood up to a man twice his size and 10 times his power, who'd gathered a community and sparked a revolution. Drive away. It's a trap. 4 words that changed everything. Caleb smiled in the darkness and closed his eyes. Somewhere he knew his father was watching. And somewhere in the rumble of distant motorcycles, in the quiet of a sleeping town, courage whispered back. 20 years later, Caleb Brennan stood on the steps of the Bakersfield courthouse. A crowd of 200 people gathered around him. He was 28 now, a master mechanic, owner of Brennan Custom Motorcycles, the most respected shop in California, married with a daughter of his own. But today he was here for something different. Today was the dedication of the Dominic Voss Memorial, not a memorial to the man, but to his victims, a plaque bearing the names of every business owner, every family, every person who'd been hurt by his operation and found the courage to stand up. At the top of the list, in bold letters, Caleb James Brennan, age 8, the whisper that started it all. Caleb looked out at the crowd, at his mother, gray-haired now but still strong, at Jack, steady as ever, at Colonel Hank Mercer, 88 and still standing straight, at Wyatt Donovan, 62, still riding, still protecting, and at his daughter Emma, 8 years old, red hair and green eyes, sitting in the front row. My name is Caleb Brennan, he said into the microphone, and I'm here to tell you that courage doesn't have an age limit. 20 years ago, I was 8 years old, invisible, scared, living in the back room of a diner, and I made a choice, to whisper, to warn, to act. He paused, looking at Emma. That choice changed my life. It changed this town. And it taught me something I want my daughter and every child here to understand. You are never too small to make a difference. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. And when you see something wrong, you have a responsibility to speak up. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Dominic Voss thought he could win by making people feel powerless, by dividing them, by making them believe they were too small to fight back. But he was wrong, because power doesn't come from fear or money or connections. It comes from courage, from standing together, from refusing to be silent. Caleb's voice grew stronger. So to every kid out there who thinks they don't matter, who thinks they're too young, too small, too invisible, I see you, and I'm telling you, your whisper can become a roar. Your courage can change the world. All you have to do is speak. The crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, engines revving as the Hells Angels saluted. Caleb stepped down from the podium and knelt in front of his daughter. You understand what I said, Em? Emma nodded, her eyes serious. You were brave, Daddy. I was scared, Caleb corrected, but I was brave anyway. And someday, when you're faced with something scary, something wrong, I want you to remember that. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you are. Emma threw her arms around his neck. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. As Caleb stood, Wyatt walked over, moving slower now, but still strong. Hell of a speech, kid. Learn from the best, Caleb said. Wyatt smiled. You know, all those years ago when you whispered that warning, I never imagined it would lead to this, to a movement, to a legacy. Neither did I, Caleb admitted. I just knew someone needed help, and I couldn't walk away. That's what makes you a hero, Caleb. Not the big moments, the small choices, the willingness to act when everyone else stays silent. Wyatt pulled out a small box from his jacket. Inside was a ring, silver, with the Hells Angels insignia. You've been an honorary member for 20 years, Wyatt said, but the club voted. Unanimous. We want to make it official, if you'll have us. Caleb stared at the ring, his throat tight. I'm honored. You earned it. Caleb slipped the ring on his finger. It fit perfectly. Around them, the celebration continued. Music, laughter, the rumble of motorcycles. A community that had been broken and rebuilt, stronger than before. And in the midst of it all, a red-haired man turned father who'd learned that sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. That courage doesn't have an age, and that a whisper, spoken at the right moment, can echo through generations. Drive away. It's a trap. 4 words, a lifetime of change, and a legacy that would never be forgotten.